Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another talk of the USSF talk series every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. For those that are joining us recently, we have almost 100 talks that you can find on the USSF page on YouTube or the website. Okay, today we are very happy to have our friend TANIA STEVANIN here with us. She's going to talk about how can Spiritism contribute to the treatment of mental health diseases. Hi, TANIA.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here. Hope you're all well.
So before I pass to TANIA, let me formally introduce her. Dr. TANIA STEVANIN is the co-founder of the Sheffield Spiritist Group and the first person to bring Spiritism to Sheffield in the UK. Before that, she worked in London with the Allan Kardec Spiritist Center, where we met a long time ago. She has a PhD in microbiology and a diploma in psychology. And for the past 11 years, she has been working in the treatment of people with substance misuse in the past 10 years with the NHS in the UK. Okay, TANIA, thank you. It's all yours.
Thank you very much. So as the topic suggests, the title suggests, it is about mental health and how, as spiritists, we can make a positive contribution to ourselves, our own mental health, the mental health of those around us, to the mental health of our patients, if we are a health worker. However, I think it's also important to bring some context to the conversation, because when we talk about Spiritism, a lot of us who introduced Spiritist groups around the world are Brazilians, and we were familiar with the Brazilian model of Spiritism and working in a very specific culture, type of culture. But now we've moved away, we are in different countries, we are interacting with people from those countries and elsewhere, and it is the reason for this particular focus in this presentation is because I've lived in the UK for 34 years. I'm now back in Brazil, and over the years it's become so clear to me that some of the things we tried in the UK didn't work in the UK. It worked very well in Brazil, and then it helped me to start asking, why did it work in Brazil and it's not working here in the UK, after working for even decades within a Spiritist context, within a Spiritist group, and then becoming a mental health worker myself. So I thought that it would be important, especially for newcomers, people who are starting to study Spiritism, or even workers who, like myself, had been working within Spiritism for a long time, to understand how we can bring Spiritism, the positive, the best of Spiritism, into our everyday lives and make a positive contribution to ourselves and others, especially regarding mental health. Because there's so much that is being developed in terms of treating physical health illnesses, and yet mental health is still a puzzle to most health professionals, including psychiatrists, psychologists, because they have this materialistic paradigm that they work by, which sees the brain as just a physical entity, the body just a bunch of cells and nothing else. but we need to understand that that's not the case. So Spiritism can and does make a very positive contribution to the treatment of mental health, both for individuals experiencing it themselves, as well as for the way we handle it in our families. If a family member is experiencing mental health problems, or a friend, and health professionals, I've gained an awful lot from Spiritism in terms of how I approached mental health in my own practice, and still do, because I'm still practicing as a psychologist. So to me, it has been very important. Mental health professionals, or professionals here, health professionals, is anyone within a caring profession. Okay, be that doctors, nurses, support workers, or even other types of staff, because it affects everyone. I had a very interesting experience some years ago in the place where I work, where clients came to me asking me to thank our housekeeper, because while they were waiting in the waiting room, he was putting up the Christmas tree. It was near Christmas and he was putting up the Christmas tree, and he was super happy, and he was very kind, and he was very polite. And I kept getting people saying, "Oh, is your housekeeper okay? Because I haven't seen him for a while. Oh, it was so lovely when he was there putting up the Christmas tree." So we can't rule anyone out when we're talking about us making a contribution to help other people with mental health issues. Anyone can make a contribution. Now, in Brazil, Brazil has a long history of Spiritism, and I will cover a bit of that in a minute. There are many dozens of Spiritist hospitals who specialize in mental health. One of the oldest ones is located in the city where I'm living at the moment, Marília. And I remember growing up hearing about the Spiritist hospital, the Spiritist hospital. I'm not very familiar with the work they do, but what I know is that it's a hospital that's always been mentioned by the population with fondness, because it was a hospital that welcomed people that could not be treated in other places. Not only that, but welcomed families, helped the families as well to understand the process, rather than just treat the person as someone who needs to be fixed. They understood that that was a complex individual that had individual needs, and so did their families. In a way, we see our introduction, or people's introduction to Spiritism, in the following way. Someone becomes interested in spiritual matters and kind of starts researching it. I myself grew up in a Catholic family. Most of my family are still Catholics and very involved in the local church. There are very few of us in my family who are Spiritists, but I remember hearing the word Spiritism for the first time coming to visit my grandmother in Marília, and hearing about the Spiritist hospital, and wanting to know what this Spiritist bit was, because I knew what a hospital was. I didn't know what a Spiritist thing was. So I started asking questions as a child. As I grew up, I started asking more pertinent questions, because then I had been introduced to some dogmas within my own religion, which was Catholicism at the time. Some doubts was beginning to surface in my mind, and I started looking for books to read. Nowadays, we don't just look for books to read, we look for talks, research online. It's more the computer that we interact with when making that initial research. Then, after learning a bit more about it, the person may their interest increase, and they start looking for a group if they want to know more and ask more questions and interact with other people and feel part of a community, because humans are very tribal. We like our little tribes. We like being involved in a community. We don't like, most of us function better as a tribe rather than individuals. So seeking a group is a natural part of the process, one may think. And then once we start attending a group, usually as a participant. After a while, weeks, months, years, we become more interested in taking a more active part in the group and making a positive contribution to the group. Some of us may start giving talks. Others may train to be a healer. Others may work training other workers. A spiritist group, even the smallest of groups, can offer a wealth of opportunities for people to become involved, from saying the initial prayer to, I remember João mentioned that I attended for many years the group in London, Allan Kardec Spiritist Group, or it was the Spiritist Group, it's the Spiritist Center now. And my role was to give the little cup of water after the healing. And that's what I did. I didn't do anything else for a long time until I became more involved. And then I started, as per usual, directing, facilitating certain meetings, and then giving talks, and then giving lectures. And that's how it progressed for me. For me, it was very much in this way that I became involved with Spiritism. And just to illustrate, there is a difference between a Spiritist group and a Spiritist center. Most Brazilians are familiar with Spiritist centers. Even if they're not Spiritists themselves, they have heard about it, because Spiritism is really well known in Brazil, and everybody knows someone who is a Spiritist who goes to a Spiritist center, or everybody knows a local Spiritist center and might even have attended meetings there. Some of members of my family, my sister, my mother included, they've attended Spiritist centers in the past, from time to time. They were never Spiritists, they never became Spiritists, they are still very much Catholics, but it was not something out of ordinary for people to be invited by a family member or a friend to attend a special activity in a different church or a Spiritist center. So in Brazil, Spiritist centers are really well known, and the structure of Spiritist centers in Brazil are very much like described here: a school, a temple, a workplace. It's a school because, as any Spiritist center or group, there will be real theoretical studies of Spiritist teachings. So we read the books, we study the questions in the Spirit's book, we study the Gospel according to Spiritism, we listen to talks. We may learn to be a healer or to become a facilitator of a youth group or an adult group. So there are many opportunities there. A temple, because Spiritism has a spiritual aspect, even to some a religious aspect. For example, Spiritism is a philosophy, and people can participate in the activities without becoming Spiritists. The people who call themselves Spiritists are usually people for whom they have left the religion they were brought up with, or if they had no religion, they embrace Spiritism as their religion, and they stop being something else. They stop being, like I stopped considering myself as a Catholic. I consider myself as a Spiritist because I embraced not just the philosophical, scientific aspects, but I embraced the spiritual aspects of Spiritism as well. It is a workplace because we don't just go there to listen to a talk and go home, but those of us who become more involved become workers within the Spiritist group or center, but also may become involved with other more wider social activities that the group may have involvement with or join forces with. So the Spiritist Center offers that focus point for those who want to be part of a community that embraces their similar values, similar beliefs as theirs, where they can join forces, work together, be part of that community. But the question here is this linear introduction to Spiritism really true? Do we really start by individually becoming interested, finding a group, attending the group, becoming more involved with the group, start working within the group? In my experience, no. That is the minority of people who are introduced to Spiritism in this way, or at least the minority of people who have contact with Spiritism. The majority, the largest majority, come into contact with a Spiritist activity because they have some kind of problem, usually mental health problems or stroke spiritual problem. So it is either because I'm suffering from depression or anxiety or some kind of obsession, or because of someone I know, family member, a friend. Someone tells me that going to that place and receiving healing will help me. Sometimes it's because someone is socially deprived or abandoned, the elderly, the young. These are the people who go to the Spiritist centers. The majority of them are in that category because they need something, they want something that they are not finding somewhere else. Usually, due to personal illness, it could be physical illness or psychological illness. We know that obsession, when prolonged, will cause even physical disturbances in the physical body, will disturb relationships. However, because of the nature of this kind of disturbances, there is no medication, not effective medication. Cases of schizophrenia, for example, most doctors are baffled by most cases of schizophrenia because every illness has a spiritual aspect, either because it is the direct cause of an obsession or because someone else has approached us because they have experienced that and latched onto us like we do in social groups. I used to work with people with substance misuse issues, and it was amazing how they found each other, how some people found each other. And the minute they found each other, they connected because they instinctively knew that they were sharing an experience, a problem. And sometimes we can help each other to share the way towards a solution. People usually come to Spiritist centers when they have tried everything else, nothing worked, and they are desperate. And that's not just in Brazil. In Brazil, that happens all the time. I started attending a group here in Marília, which is a small group. And the way it is structured is like this. There is someone who says a short prayer to begin with and start talking about moral, spiritual topics. Sometimes they tell a story, sometimes they take something out of the gospel according to Spiritism, while everybody waits, because as we walk in, someone is at the door taking the names of everybody who comes in. And in another room, there is a team of healers separate from the main area. They have prepared themselves in their special way to be in a position to help people. And then your name is called and you go into that special room to receive healing. And they ask you what brings you there. And I have recently needed special healing. And I remember on one particular occasion when I explained to them what it was, a physical health problem, what the physical health problem was. The healer who was there asked for someone else to come and join them. And having had the many years of experience in this context that I've had, to me it was quite clear that it was a younger member of staff who was probably relatively new, who might not have been a medium as such, and asked for help from someone with more experience to provide me with more of what I needed, to make sure that I left there with as much of they could offer as possible. So just to illustrate that everybody else who was there for the same reason. They were all there receiving healing. They were not. Many of them didn't even come back to the main room to listen to the end of the talk. They just received healing and left. And this is the reality of the large majority of people who attend Spiritist centers. When I was living in the UK and participating, and especially when we had face-to-face meetings, we haven't had those for 2 years now. The majority of the newcomers who attended our group came because they have some kind of spiritual problem, usually obsession or other social issues. They felt alone, they felt destituted emotionally, materially, and they wanted help, and they were told that we were a nice group of people, that we prayed for other people, that we offered healing, that we could possibly help them. The majority of them came for 1 or 2 meetings and never came back. A few who had already been introduced to Spiritism, who were already participating in groups in Brazil or elsewhere, who sometimes were already workers in groups in Brazil, stayed. But the majority of people, very, very few people, came to our group, being introduced to Spiritism there, and stayed. And of those, even less, we would say maybe 0.5%, offered to make a contribution at some point. They were happy to go, sit, take part in the study, listen to the prayer, receive healing, go home, do the same the next week. So our vision of what brings someone to a Spiritist center and keeps them there, I think sometimes needs to be challenged, especially if we are someone leading a group or thinking of starting a group. We need to be realistic about what people's expectations are when they come to us. So why the Brazilian model may not be possible or appropriate elsewhere? We have to bear in mind that each Spiritist center is unique because the people who participate in those groups are unique. The communities in which those groups exist are also unique. I used to facilitate support groups for my clients back in the UK for many, many years. And I used to tell them there was a model called Smart Recovery, which some of you might actually have heard. It's a kind of similar to the AA because it is to help people deal with addictions, but it has a different approach, a slightly less dogmatic approach, and it is roughly based on cognitive behavioral approaches. But I used to tell people it's a group that is international. The model is international. It exists everywhere. However, each group is different. And I used to tell my especially new clients who had not been introduced to AA or to other therapeutic groups, go to all of them, as many as possible. Then choose the one that you feel most connected with. And if at some point you start feeling that that connection is not there anymore, then do the same. Go everywhere and find the one that you feel connected with. Why? Because every day we had a different meeting. Because every day we had someone new or someone who wasn't there, or even if the same group came 2 consecutive weeks, their experiences in the week in between would have been unique. So it made for a unique group, a first-hand experience of a unique experience every single week. This happens in Spiritist centers as well. This happens in Spiritist groups as well. And sometimes people leave on groups saying, oh, this is bad, I don't like Spiritism. No, not necessarily. You don't like what's happening in that particular group. So bearing that in mind, we need to perhaps be a bit more cautious when trying to just introduce what we knew from somewhere else in the new place where we are. I couldn't just bring what I knew and know now from Spiritism in Brazil, in the group that I'm attending, and take it to the UK and make it work there instantly, because that's not how it works. Now, there is a reason why that doesn't work, and I want to bring some historical context here. These are just a few pioneers and people, a couple of people that probably everybody listening to this talk will know. So starting with Adolfo Bezerra de Menezes, look at the date of birth, and in most cases here, of discarnation of each one of them. And when you look about the most important, the key figures of Spiritism across the world, you will see something similar. In Brazil had a quite unique experience in terms of Spiritism. Brazilian Spiritism is contemporary to Kardec's Spiritism. Kardec, as he developed the structure that we now know as Spiritism, the teachings, as he organized the information, he was sharing that information with others across the world. Here in Brazil, one thing happened that didn't happen in most other places. The people who absorbed that information, they created a structure that was really solid and became what we know as Spiritism here in Brazil. Now, apart from the date of birth and discarnation, I want you to pay a little bit of attention to the one or two lines of summary for each one of them. Let's say Adolfo Bezerra de Menezes, he was a doctor, he was a politician, he became interested in Spiritism quite early on, when the first translation of the Spirit's book became available in Portuguese, and he became known, even at his own time, and later on, and still is, as the medic, sorry, there's a spell problem there, medic of the poor. Then when you look at Khyber Schutel, again, he was a professional, he was also a politician, and he was known as the father of the poor. Euripides Barçanufo was a really well-known medium. He had quite extensive mediuminic abilities. However, he was an educator, he was also a politician, a journalist, and he founded the first Spiritist school in Brazil. And he was also very well known as being a philanthropist. He helped the poorest, the neediest in his local community. That was the bulk of his work. And then there is Francisco Cândido Xavier, also known as Chico Xavier, and Divaldo Franco. And I didn't put a summary of their biography there because most people know them. Divaldo Franco, still, thank God, with us, teaching. They both produced a lot of books that we study, that helped us, still does, but also were involved in the founding of many organizations. Divaldo, for example, with the Mansão do Caminho, orphanages, homes for the elderly. These people worked tirelessly their entire life within their community, helping their community. They did not ask for people to become spiritists. Their main focus was, and still is, in the case of Divaldo Franco and many others. Of course, this is just a tiny selection of the many pioneers and amazing people who are leading Spiritism across the world at the moment. Many of them do the work that others have done in the past, founding schools. The majority of people who are the key members of the Spiritist community in terms of taking Spiritism to others, keeping it alive, and helping, are doing that quietly. We don't know their names, we don't know where they are, but their communities do. The people they are helping know who they are. There is a school in Rio de Janeiro, I'm afraid I don't know the name, but my very good friend and co-founder of this Sheffield Spiritist group, Lindalva Walker, she still contributes to that school financially with fundraising activities. It is located in a very poor area, helps poor children to be educated within the principles of Spiritism, of moral boundaries, etc. This lady, not even I can remember her name, but I know of her work. She has now returned to spirit, but she did, and probably still does in spirit, because we work even more when we are not materialized in this world as physical entities than she did even when she was here. But she did amazing work with that community for decades. She gave her life to that community. Now, I don't want anybody to be disheartened thinking that, to be able to use Spiritism to help myself and help others and improve mental health around me and my community, I need to become one of those amazing people that I mentioned here, because that probably isn't going to be possible for many different reasons. But what I want to highlight in this slide is how long Spiritism has been around in Brazil, how long it took for Brazilian Spiritism to be what it is now. So when we go to a different country, as I did, young, full of hope, full of energy, thinking that I could do anything, I could achieve anything, and I probably believed that I could achieve it by next week. And nearly 40 years later, I'm reviewing things and thinking, I haven't moved very far at all. I've taken maybe 1 or 2 steps in the right direction, taken a few backwards. I had to re-walk that route again. In terms of our Spiritist group there in Sheffield, if my ambitions had been materialized, then we would have an amazing all singing, all dancing Spiritist center with loads of activities, many rooms where people could have a healing team, a mediumship team, everything. As we see in some of the larger Spiritist centers in Brazil, some of which I have attended. However, we are still doing studies via Zoom for many different reasons. One of the reasons is that it takes a very long time for us to break with traditions. It takes time for us to break with certain cultural, behavioral aspects. In Brazil, for nearly 2 centuries, Spiritist centers, they work as an informal supplementary health support system. Brazil is a very uneven country where if you don't have money, and a large number of people here have very little or not at all, if you have to rely on the government health system, you die. Many people in the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, in the last 2 years, unfortunately died waiting for an intensive care bed. Many died because they couldn't get a hospital bed at all. The people who could pay were better off, but not by that much in the case of a pandemic. But in terms of other illnesses, I have had a little health scare recently, and I came across this dichotomy firsthand, because I did attend a local health center, and I was very well looked after by the staff. They were very kind, very polite, but some of the tests I had to do, I had to wait for many weeks. I couldn't wait many weeks, but I had the resources to pay privately. So I managed to get a diagnosis much faster, get the treatment much sooner than I would have had otherwise. If I had been someone without resources, for many of them, and someone told me that Spiritist center cured me. I had something similar. I went there, they put their hands on top of my head, and then I felt better. I was cured. I wouldn't care what religion I grew up with. I would have gone there because someone told me I could be fixed there. And you know what? They don't charge for anything. So you go, you get help, and you don't have to spend any money, except for maybe what you pay for the bus to get there. And if you don't have the fares, if you can walk, you can walk. So Spiritism in Brazil has, from the beginning, been very connected with treating people's illnesses, especially mental health illnesses, through healing, through the work of mediums. But that needs a very strong structure and a lot of people to help. Brazil is a country where the word God is not anathema. People talk about God all the time. Everywhere you go, there are pictures of Jesus, the cross, other pictures of other saints. Even where there are no pictures, often you get people saying, not just have a lovely day, but God bless you. Go with God. Oh, thank God. So culturally speaking, Brazil is a country that embraces religiosity in all forms. And also a country that's very open-minded about attending different churches or different denominations of the same sect. So I grew up experiencing many different aspects of religion. I used to go to Mass, attend Mass every Sunday. I went through my Sunday school. I went through all the rituals of the Catholic Church. But for a long period of time, we had a neighbor who was Protestant. And on Wednesdays, we used to go to her church and sing the hymns and go through the rituals there. And then there was a period in which I also attended the Spiritist group nearby for a period of time. And it was after a while that I said to my mom, it's getting confusing. I'm going to have to pick one because it's a bit much. And she was fine with that. I went to a wedding once that they had the Catholic wedding in the morning, and they had the Umbanda, the Candomblé wedding in the evening, which is Afro religion, African religion that was incorporated in Brazil. So Brazil is a country that's very open-minded about religious aspects. In Europe, my experience was otherwise. A lot of the times, the minute you mention anything that people thought was religious, they took a step back and even discouraged the vocabulary. I've always been of the opinion that I need to be true to myself and to be true to my values, especially if I'm giving advice to other people and I'm a hypocrite. At least, if I felt like I was being a hypocrite, I wouldn't be able to help my patients as well as I could. So I never hid who I was. I never hid that I had a religion, that I followed a specific philosophy. And I was very glad to answer questions when people asked. But I've always been very careful when treating patients to find out about their beliefs. Because when they are there with me in that context, it's not about me, it's about them. And this is a spiritist value that I learned as I became a spiritist. Because Spiritism encourages us to be open-minded, to be kind to others, to not take their faith away if we can't replace it with something better and stronger. So, to be able to use our Spiritist knowledge and improve our ability to help others, especially those with mental health issues elsewhere, it is very important for us to understand the culture, the community, what the community needs are. Another advantage that Brazil has over many other countries is that first, to being a country that embraces religion, so people can very quickly switch from one religion to the next and become really involved in that new community, because the transition is much easier than having to start from scratch. Is that some of you may not know, but we are a really large country with loads of people. And amongst our population, there is a growing number of people who are retired, people who work from home. So most spiritist centers have a number of workers available to them that in most parts of the world we can only dream of, because spiritism in those parts of the world are only at the beginning. Again, I ask you to think back to that slide of the spiritist pioneers in Brazil. Brazilian spiritism is contemporary to Kardec's spiritism, so it is 200 years old, whereas in some countries it's 10, 20, maybe 30 years old, maybe a bit more, but always very limited to a small group of people who study together. So the number of people that are available to work in Brazil is a huge advantage. And this group that I mentioned to you earlier on, I came across, I was there for the first time, and the gentleman who was giving the talk is a psychiatrist who works locally. He turned out to be my mother's psychiatrist, the person who she has been going to for some medication recently. Psychiatrists in Brazil, again, work in a different way than psychiatrists in the UK, for example. It's more, it's a little bit of more of a mixture between psychiatry and psychology. So people will go to see a psychiatrist because they're feeling a bit down and they just want to have a chat with someone. But this is a very well respected medical professional in the community. He is a mental health specialist. He gave one of the best talks I've ever heard. He makes no secret of his beliefs, but recently I had the opportunity to actually see him in action as a doctor. He was exceptional. He is exceptional. But never Spiritism was mentioned. But because I knew his background to a certain extent outside his profession, I could hear some of the conversation he was having there. I could hear Spiritism coming through. The amazing way in which he received people, almost as a friend, the advice he gave, the way he was handling medication, always encouraging mental well-being rather than just take this pill and you're going to be cured. Always focusing more on other activities that the person was involved with, hobbies, family, what they did for fun, encouraging them to continue to increase those activities that created natural well-being, so that medication would be just a little helper along the way that could be left out like a crutch that we don't need anymore when the leg is healed, and then we can walk freely again. So these are the kind of people that are working actively in the spiritist centers in Brazil. They are taking that belief, those principles to the hospitals, to the universities, where they teach, where they work. We still need, in most countries, to develop this structure, and that takes time and courage to be who we are, to not be afraid in a hostile environment when it comes to religious beliefs. And here, I'll point out that in some countries, the hostile environment is so hostile as to threaten the life of that individual. So, is that all doom and gloom? No. It is important that we are realistic, but let's focus again on how our knowledge of the Spiritist teachings can help us improve our ability to help. So being realistic means we need to know the community we work with, the laws that we have to manage. A few years ago, many years ago now, we used to give healing or passes, laying on of hands, directly, person to person. And then some of the laws in the UK changed, and there was a question as to whether we could be liable to lawsuits if someone complained that they felt ill after coming to the group. To avoid that, we had to pay very expensive insurance, do all kinds of professional checks, etc., like a mental health professional, which our group could not afford. We had 3 people who were involved in that at that time. So what did we do? We had a meeting, we discussed what we could do, and we decided to do communal healing, which means we just sitting together, praying together, and directing the healing energies mentally without the physical aspects of it. Because that meant we would fall outside those new regulations, and we could still do something good. We could still offer the same thing, but in a way that protects us. We could only do that because we were familiar with the laws. Behaviors, prejudices, local prejudices, our own prejudices. So we need to learn more about the way pioneers in the past worked, how they developed things, but be realistic about what we can achieve within our own context. So we need to look locally about what does my community need, rather than the community will need what I have to offer. So I think a lot of the times I found myself doing this. I think they need to learn more about spirituality, so I'm going to teach them about spirituality, but they're hungry. They're not going to care about spirituality. If they're hungry, they need food first. If they're ill, they need healing first before they can engage intellectually with the activity that I have to offer. Each one of us can make a contribution. And I bring, I'm finishing with this quote here. By sharing our thoughts and beliefs with a therapist or simply someone willing to listen to them in a non-judgmental way, the individual expels mental toxins. Therefore, a healthy conversation, a book, or artistic event can become a powerful mechanism of positive induction or a positive change. So we can help through our prayers, through a healthy conversation. We can help with developing a healthy mental attitude within ourselves. If we notice negative thoughts, patterns, then we need to challenge those. If we, the model that I practice mostly nowadays called solution-focused hypnotherapy, it's all about problem-free talk. So you don't talk so much about what brings you here, what made you feel so ill, what was the problems with your family, what was the problems from the past, digging up hidden memories. No, because they know they are suffering, they want healing, they want to feel better. So we talk about what's making you happy, what made you feel good, what was the last time, when was the last time that you felt better, what was happening, who were you with, what were you doing. Because if someone is suicidal, for example, and we want them to have hope for the future, just talking about the problems that make them feel suicidal is not going to really help them. We need to get them out of this mental wave pattern. We need to help them to improve. And in this respect, Spiritism can be hugely helpful in helping us. So if we are in a context where we can't work or found a spiritist hospital or a spiritist school or a home for the elderly or an orphanage, but we can watch our mental patterns or thought patterns, be more positive ourselves. We were already irradiating positivity around us. When we come across someone who is ill, who is disturbed, we can bring that into their lives, inviting them to do the same. Not by telling them, you have to think more positively. No, helping them to think more positively. Look at that flower. Oh, did you hear those birds singing today? I think spring is upon us. let's do something fun. Let's do something positive. We are spiritists, not just when we are within a spiritist group or spiritist center. We are spiritists everywhere, like we are humans everywhere, like we are spirit everywhere. So Spiritism can help us with the specific knowledge we need to understand mental illnesses, to understand obsession, to even understand some physical health conditions when those are the side effects of spiritual, mental, emotional disturbances. And we can improve the mental atmosphere, the spiritual atmosphere of every place we go to. And so I hope I haven't bored you too much with this talk, and I'm going to stop here and take questions if anyone has any.
Dr. Tania. Very interesting, and yes, we have plenty of questions actually, so we'll try to cover all of them. So let's start with a question from Kirsten. Thank you, Kirsten. I'm curious to know what has not worked in Europe but has worked in Brazil, as you mentioned.
I think one of the main things is the fact that Brazil is so open to spiritual language. We can talk openly about spirituality, and so if I want to start a spiritist school, it's not frowned upon. If I want to start, if I have the resources to start a spiritist hospital, I can call it a spiritist hospital. I don't have to disguise it as something else, which means people are not they're not stigmatized as much for having a religion, for being a spiritist. Of course, there has been persecution. Of course, there is still prejudice because when we talk about reincarnation, about mediumship, there is still a lot of misunderstanding, and it's not all beautiful in Brazil. But because Brazil is a spiritual country by nature, and because of this mixagenation of races, cultures, and religious beliefs that exist in Brazil, Brazil is truly a mixed pot of cultures, where cultures are embraced, like our cuisine. If I like what you cook in your country, I'm going to embrace it, change it a little, and call it Brazilian. And this is what Brazil is. There is nothing that's pure Brazilian, because everything that we consider Brazilian is a mixture of a lot of things that came from a lot of parts of the world. It makes it easier in a country like Brazil. In other countries, you have to start literally from scratch by being a better person and letting other people remember. People used to say to me, "Oh, you're so patient, you're so kind," because I didn't lose my temper when people disagreed with me, when people yelled at me at work, which thank goodness it didn't happen very often. I'm very lucky who I attract into my life, including my clients, who are usually lovely, but they could be very difficult sometimes. And they also knew I went to the spiritist groups, and they knew I prayed. They knew I talked about irradiating positive energies, and that creates an association. And many people said to me, I wish I could have your faith. I could have a belief like you do, because I can see how strong you are in certain situations. And to me, that was a huge praise in terms of being a spiritist and working in a context that usually frowns upon spirituality. So I think for a lot of people, it won't be possible to become a spiritist, like a Brazilian spiritist, even if we are Brazilians in a different country. So this is one of the main stumbling blocks.
Thanks. So let's move from Violet. Thanks, Violet. It seems that as if mental disorders are more prevalent now than ever before. Is there a spiritual reason for this? And how would it help the planet progress?
There is a spiritual reason, and it's multifaceted. One of the reasons is because we are in transition spiritually. The planet is in transition. When we are in transition, think about a lake. If you look at a lake and it is calm and tranquil, and then a storm comes, and the surface of the water looks very clear. A storm comes and shifts all the debris that's underneath, brings it to the surface, and then you can see that the lake becomes cloudy. There are bits of things that was underneath at the bottom and now floating on the surface again. This is what's happening spiritually with the world at the moment. So certain things become more apparent that were hidden before. Also, in phases of transition like what we are going through, and those transitions can last from decades to centuries, okay? So it could be a very prolonged period of transition, but we've been going through this for a while now, so at some point we'll hit a calm phase again. But what happens is more needy spirits incarnate during those transition periods because they are having a last chance to hang around, and if they don't learn the lesson, they might need to be linked with a different world, a more primitive world, to give them more time, because we have the eternity. It's up to us to make eternity not to be as miserable as possible, but better, as good as possible. But if people need more time, they are not forced into changes that they cannot make. They are just allowed to do that somewhere else. But because of that, to give people a final chance to still incarnate on this planet when it evolves and becomes a better place to live, a refurbished house that has more rooms and pleasant rooms, then there will be an influx of needy spirits incarnating. So crime rates go up, conflicts around the world, illnesses, because the mental and spiritual atmosphere of the planet becomes heavier. And a lot of people can't cope with that as well. I myself used to talk about this with friends. Sometimes you work in a place, or you go to a city like London or Sao Paulo, and you feel the heaviness in the atmosphere. It sometimes takes your breath away. But if you know what to do, how to protect yourself, then you cope better, but other people don't. So they will develop depression, anxiety, more chronic mental health issues. So there is a variety of reasons, but it's all for good reason, all to help us to progress faster and enter into a world, a phase of regeneration where all of this will be cleared out of the air. So less illnesses, more social equity, justice, less wars, less crime, but we are still in the cleanup phase.
Thanks, Tanya. Yes, very interesting, especially with everything that we're going through nowadays, right? From Glaucio, thanks, Glaucio. How to talk about spiritual matters without offending our skeptical friends?
Everybody believes in something, even if they say they don't. And I've come across some atheist fanatics that could even build a church and worship atheism because it's in human nature to be believers. But vocabulary sometimes matter, and using more neutral vocabulary. So for example, if I'm talking to someone and I don't know who they are, I don't know what their beliefs are, and I want to start in a good way, but I want to convey something positive to that person, or if I know who they are, I'll use their vocabulary. So if I was seeing a patient who was Muslim, then I would say God or Allah, and I would talk about prayer. If I saw someone who was Catholic, I would use the word angels instead of spiritual benefactors. I would use the word God's energy instead of healing, perhaps. If I was talking to an atheist, I would use vocabulary such as universal positive forces, or the positive forces in the universe or in nature. I would, instead of tell them to pray, I would tell them to use visualization of something positive, of light enveloping them, of beautiful colors, of imagining them in a beautiful place, of place they had been, or a place they are imagining. It's all the same, no matter what words we use, so long as we are trying to convey the message. If the message is improve your mental attitude, improve your thought patterns, connect with the positive forces in the universe, improve your mental health, improve your physical health, absorb something positive, something good. That's all that matters. If we're trying to help someone else and we're not just trying to convert them, we can find the vocabulary that keeps us true to ourselves and help us connect in a positive way and help someone else. That's all that is necessary.
Thanks. Yeah, very true. From Paula Schmidt, how are spiritual counselors in Brazil trained in basic counseling skills and understanding of when to refer to professionals?
I'm not sure I can answer that question because I've been away from Brazil for 34 years. So I could tell you that in England, but not so much in Brazil. What I suspect from what I've seen and interacting with mental health professionals here that do the similar kind of job that I do is that more often than not, a responsible spiritist worker, meaning someone who works within a spiritist center and sees people in a counseling manner, will tell them, and I was asked that question when I went to the spiritist center here recently, and I said that I had a physical health problem. First thing that they asked me was, have you seen a doctor? Are you receiving treatment? And I said yes and yes. And they said, great, continue doing that. Continue to see a doctor, follow the treatment. And that's what the advice is. They don't try to be what they are not. There are many psychologists, psychiatrists, other mental health workers who are also spiritists, and then it's the other way around. They bring spiritism to the practice, and they will tell clients to pray, to go to the spiritist center, or to go to church, or whatever they go to. And if they don't go to anywhere and they don't want to go to anywhere, they will say, do some gardening, go to a therapy group, or go for a walk in a nice place. So they will incorporate their spiritist beliefs to their practice. And the spiritist will tell them, go to the doctor. Come here for healing. Come here for the talks, the activities, but also go to the doctor, take your meds as prescribed, be a good person. And that's it.
Thank you, Tanya. Yeah. It's always a challenge when we receive people in the spiritist centers that think that the spiritual treatment will solve all the problems without concerning about the physical treatment, right? Yeah. All right, from Yasko. Thanks, Yasko. Hi, Tanya. Very interesting. If in Europe, in marked contrast to Brazil, there is an aversion for the religious and an extent to spiritual aspect of Spiritism, how do you present Spiritism to be helpful to treat mental suffering? Do you bring to the table the notion of life after death?
My approach was, if I felt that it was appropriate to ask the question, I asked if the person had a belief. Do you believe in any spiritual philosophy, anything? If the person said yes, they would usually tell me what, and that would help me to gauge the vocabulary. If they asked me if I believed in anything, I would tell yes, and I would tell them that I practiced a philosophy called Spiritism, and they could Google it and find out, but I wasn't going to go into details about that because the consultation wasn't about me and my beliefs, but about them and what I could do to help them. You can also work with the community. So our little group in Sheffield is tiny. It's always been very tiny. But individually, each one of us have engaged with different charities, have made contributions, but also at least over Christmas, we would join together as a group and we would make a donation or a contribution to a charity as the Sheffield Spiritist group. So gradually opening up that knowledge, it's a bit like learning a new language, and you need to familiarize yourself with the vocabulary first. a lot of the times people think Spiritism and spiritualism is the same. So when they hear Spiritism, they immediately connect with a set of beliefs and practices that are not Spiritist. So we often had to educate people as to what Spiritism meant. It's a gradual process. Unless we had financial resources and people power to open a school or our own institution, charitable organization, we have to work with what we have available and do the little we can, if little is all we can do, without trying to convert Europe or convert the country. Spiritism teaches us that it doesn't matter how long it takes, so long as we are going the right direction, we will get there. We will get to the destination. And Sheffield, many more people now know about Spiritism in Sheffield than they did 30 years ago when we started our group, or less than 30. And nobody would know if we haven't done the work. So even as an individual person, the group in Sheffield exists because I went to Sheffield and I had some knowledge, but I didn't have anyone to implement that with. And then Lindalva came, moved to Sheffield just a few months after I did, and had the desire to learn more about Spiritism. And Janet Duncan, who she called, said, there are no Spiritist centers in Sheffield, but there is a Spiritist person that lives there, and I know her. Here's her telephone number. And a week after we met, we started our first study group in Lindalva's living room, studying the Gospel according to Spiritism. Just the three of us, me, Lindalva, and her husband, Richard. 30 years later, or so, thereabouts, Spiritism is known in Sheffield. Not as known as we would like, but much better known. So it's about not thinking, I have to do everything, but doing what we can, when we can, where we are.
Very good. Yeah. Thanks. And I think the next question talks a little bit about that, expands a little bit about that. That's from Paul Jacobi. Thanks, Paul. Do you think that the further integration of English in centers will assist in the use of centers to assist with mental health issues in the US? So what he means is there is a lot of centers still that do most of the work in Portuguese, right? So the difficulty of bringing English into the centers, and do you think the importance of bringing English into the centers and use English will help this in further developing the assistance of mental health issues?
Thank you very much for asking this question, because it is probably one of the most important issues, one of the greatest barriers to the development of Spiritism across the world. We Brazilians have, like many other people, huge difficulty in understanding that we cannot take Brazilian Spiritism to other countries. We need to build Spiritism in that country. We need to integrate, we need to speak the language, we need to offer that population something for them. This is something that's really close to my heart, because I've always felt really strongly about this. And one of the agreements that I had with Lindalva to begin with, and Richard as well, who is born and bred in Sheffield, was that every activity in our group will be in English from day one. Every material that we present, books, leaflets, whatever, will be in English from day one. We had a copy of the main books in Portuguese because we were also aware that there would be people attending our group who could not speak English. But our activities were in English, and one of us, me or Lindalva, would sit with that person and translate to Portuguese to them, and would translate back to English their questions, their answers, their contribution. But we always made it very clear, our group is in the UK, the language is English, the majority of the population speak English, so English is the language we work with. And also being culturally sensitive Many countries, including the UK, they don't like too much physical contact, no much kissing and hugging and all of that. I personally prefer not as well. And the pandemic kind of, highlighted the need for some social distance for our own safety. But lots of people feel really uncomfortable with this kind of thing. So we need to know the culture in which we live and be spiritists for that culture. So yes, that is one of the main barriers still, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Tanya. Yes, that speaks deep to my heart also, because when we first moved here, I remember Divaldo telling us long time ago, you do Spiritism in the language of where you live, right? And I remember when we moved to Miami, we had to learn to do Spiritism in Spanish because that's the main language in Miami. But here in the US, it's in English. And yes, I fully agree with you, and I know the importance of doing that. So we have another one from Kirsten. Dr. STEVANIN, a lot of Westerners embraced Buddhism, Eastern beliefs. Why do you think the same isn't being done with Spiritism as readily?
I think one of the greatest barriers that I came across, including Brazil and the UK and elsewhere, is Spiritism is very strong about personal responsibility. So the principle of karma in Hinduism, Buddhism is quite vague in a way, and the emphasis is on ancestry and the meditation, but it doesn't offer very clear. Again, I might be speaking out of place here because I don't know as much about those philosophies as I probably should. But the little experience I had was that in Spiritism, someone comes to a group and they want something fixed. They have a problem with spiritual interference and they want that to go away. And then or even if it's something milder, and then when you start studying business of we make our own future, we are the architects of our own destiny, it scares people because for centuries, even thousands of years, we brainwashed ourselves with the belief that we can get something for nothing. I've been bad, and I can ask for forgiveness at the last minute of my incarnation and I'll go to heaven. Or I can offer God something, some gift, and God will grant me what I want. And when we start stressing and highlighting and stressing again that you have to work for it, a lot of people get scared and go away, or they think it's just too much. They just don't have the energy or the willpower. So, and then they go to a philosophy, a spiritual though it is, that is more gentle, that doesn't make them feel like they have to make such an effort, and it make them feel better. But also there is the aspect that God knowing us and knowing that we get there at different in our own time, and some people faster, some people slower, some people through one way, some another. God provides us with as many philosophies and religious beliefs and whatever we need at that particular point in time in our existences that helps us to move along a little bit. So someone may not be able to be a spiritist in this incarnation, but they can be a good Buddhist and practice their meditation every day and try to be a better person. And according to Spiritism, that's being a good spiritist. They might not call themselves that, but they're being better spiritists than some people who go to the spiritist center, who work, who apparently are great spiritists, but are impatient, fight with their wives or husbands, kick the dog, have lots of terrible thoughts in their minds all the time, although they're having that with a beauty smile on their faces. God knows us internally. So it doesn't really matter. According to Spiritism, you don't have to call yourself spiritist to be a good spiritist. So long as you're a good person, that's all that matters.
Yeah. I remember Chico mentioning that if the motto of Spiritism was without Spiritism there is no salvation, he wouldn't be a Spiritist. The motto of Spiritism is without charity there is no salvation, right?
Not me either.
Yes. So this is important also for those that live outside Brazil, right? What can you recommend for those that live in places where there are no spiritist centers? There are many, especially here in the US.
Start at home. Charity starts at home. Studying starts at home. Jesus said that as well. You know, we have to start where we are. We have to do what we can where we are. So start with the regular study of the gospel at home. And then, if you know someone who may benefit from that, invite them. Or if you know someone who wants to do that kind of study, especially now we know we don't even have to be physically together. I know a couple of people who live in different cities, but they wanted to study, but they didn't want to study on their own. So they started their little online group. And it's just the two of them. They read, they study together, they talk, and they also participate in our group on Thursdays. So start where you are. You don't have to aim to have a spiritist center or to start a spiritist center. What will happen is, if that is supposed to happen, you come across someone else and you either be the leader in that process or someone who will help someone with a bit of leadership. In my experience, for example, I told you about me and Lindalva, and we laugh about that when we reminisce about our meeting and what happens next. And I said, God knew me very well, knows me very well, because I have a lot of knowledge, but I'm not a starter. I don't start anything. I need to be kick-started into action, because otherwise I sit there and I hope and I pray and I hope and I pray and I don't move. Lindava came along and she gave me like whoosh, and I went, because some people need a kickstart, no matter how much knowledge they have. And that's why we get together, because we have different talents, different abilities. I'm quite good with information, and Lindava is very good with action. So together we managed to start something. And Richard is very good at helping with other things. He built the room that we studied for many years. So so each person contributes in a different way, but start where you are.
Thanks, Tanya. Okay, so we are close to the end, but I want to pose this last question because I thought it's interesting. Which female founders would you also include in the, you brought a lot of male figures, Dr. Bezerra de Menezes.
I know, politicians as well, most of them.
Yes.
I did look into that, because the reason why there are many, by the way, if you Google key figures in Spiritism, you will come across them. But unfortunately, I wanted to concentrate in Brazil because I was drawing parallels with the Brazilian Spiritism and other Spiritism. I think Eusebio Palladino is an Italian one, contemporary from Bezerra de Menezes as well. Ivonia Pereira, very well-known medium in Brazil who wrote many books. And there are many other women. But we come from a patriarchal society. So yes, mostly men, mostly white. But that's not to say that the women were not key figures, because either they were mediums or leaders, many of them leaders as well, or they were enabling the men to do the work. So don't feel disheartened, and I did not overlook it on purpose. Just that some of them, especially because I wanted to illustrate how long Spiritism has been developed and established in Brazil. I was looking for the early figures in Spiritism across the world, and they were people from other countries, Portugal, Italy, other parts of Europe. So that was the reason why they were male, but there are many others there. I will encourage everybody to go and do some research yourselves, because there are some amazing people whose name I didn't know, and I thought, gosh, I wish I had known a bit more about their work, and I want to go back and do a bit more research myself as well. So thanks for the question.
Yes, Jussara reminds us, Amélie Baudet, Allan Kardec's wife, right?
Of course, yes. Yeah, without her, we might not have had Kardec.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jussara. Okay, thanks, Tanya. I think our time is up. We had some more questions, but fortunately we don't have more time. But thank you very much. It was very helpful. We appreciate your time, and I'm sure that you'll be back with us. As I mentioned in the beginning, we have almost 100 talks already recorded, all in English. Again, important, in the United States Spiritist Federation YouTube channel or the United States Spiritist Federation website. Next week, I want to invite you for a very interesting talk by Dr. Alexander Moreira Almeida, Survival of Consciousness. And I want to call your attention that most people are unaware that the evidence produced by over 150 years of systematic scientific research on survival that has involved some of the brightest scientific and philosophical minds of the period. Dr. Alexander is very well known in the forefront of the research in Spiritism and science, with a lot of published articles. It's really going to be very interesting and worth coming back next week on Saturday at 11 a.m. Also a reminder, our initiation into Spiritism course every Sunday at 10 a.m. that started 5 weeks ago. We have still several classes to go. So every Sunday you can join at 10 a.m. to watch the presentation. And the one tomorrow is presented by yours truly, where I talk about perispirit and fluids. So please take your time. You can watch it live or you can watch later if you missed any of those. And finally, I would like to invite Dr. Tania to do our final prayer. Thank you all for watching us.
First of all, we would like to thank our spiritual benefactors for all the help that we have received to enable us to join together today in this presentation, in this activity, for even though we were further apart physically, our thoughts were together, connecting us in strings, waves of light that we could generate and send out into the world that needs so much light and happiness and joy at the moment. We ask God, Jesus, our guiding light that guides this world's development, the earthly humanity, to help us, to remind us that we are important, that we are valuable, that our contribution, when done willingly, happily, for the good of ourselves and others, is very valuable. And together, each tiny little contribution, the widow's mite that each one of us have to offer, can create a treasure of light and positive energies to counterbalance some of the disturbing energies that there is here on earth at the moment. So let us all remember that. Let us all feel and know the value that exists inside of us, and be able to continue our journey of learning, of self-discovery, of self-improvement, helping ourselves and others in the process, and our world, our human family. Once again, we thank our benefactors, individual, the groups that unite us all together, for all the help that we have received, the protection, the inspiration, the love that links us all. Thank you.